She thought he was just a broke U.S. traveler, but when he showed up in a limousine to confess— Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The soft hum of rain echoed down the quiet streets of Savannah, Georgia. Inside a small coffee shop tucked between an antique bookstore and a florist, the aroma of roasted beans mingled with the sound of thunder outside. Behind the counter, Grace Miller wiped the counter for what felt like the 100th time that day. The lunch crowd had long gone, and only a few empty cups remained, as reminders that her business still had life. Grace glanced at the old wall clock. It was nearly 6 o'clock in the evening. The rain had not stopped since morning. Just as she was about to close up, the door creaked open. A man stood there, dripping wet from head to toe. His jacket was torn, his backpack sagged with water, and his brown hair clung to his forehead. He looked exhausted, lost, and hungry. Grace hesitated only for a moment. "You can come in," she said gently. "You look freezing." "Oh." The man stepped inside, shaking off the rain. His voice was low, humble. "Thank you. I did not mean to bother you. I just needed a dry place for a few minutes." "It is no bother," Grace replied, already pouring a steaming cup of coffee. "This one is on the house." He blinked in surprise. "You do not have to do that." "I know," she smiled. "But sometimes a warm drink can fix a cold day." He accepted the cup carefully, his fingers trembling from the chill. "Thank you, ma'am. That is kind of you." Grace studied him quietly. His shoes were worn through at the edges, his jeans patched and faded. There was something polite, almost old-fashioned about him. But the tired look in his eyes told a story of long roads and heavier burdens. She asked, "Passing through town?" He nodded. "Yeah, I have been traveling across the country. Money's tight. Just trying to see as much as I can before I have to head home." Grace's heart softened. She knew that tone, the one that tried to sound hopeful while hiding exhaustion. "Well," she said, "Savannah is lucky to have you tonight. Storms here can be cruel to strangers." He chuckled softly. "Seems like the storm's kinder than most cities I have seen." That made her laugh, the sound light against the drumming rain. "You must be from the north. You have that funny way of saying coffee." He smiled, embarrassed. "Boston. Born and raised." "Oh." When he finished his drink, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a crumpled $10 bill. "Please, take this. I insist." Grace shook her head. "Keep it. You look like you need it more than I do." But he gently placed the bill on the counter anyway. "Then call it a thank you note. For kindness, not coffee." He picked up his backpack and left quietly into the rain. Grace stood there for a long while, staring at that $10 bill lying beneath the glow of the counterlight. Something about him, his calm gratitude, his lonely eyes lingered. Outside, the streetlights shimmered through puddles. Inside, Grace tucked the old bill into her apron pocket, unaware that this small act of kindness had just tied her destiny to a man whose truth she could never have imagined. And on that stormy evening in Savannah, two lives crossed paths for the very first time, one out of need, the other out of heart. Neither of them knew that this simple cup of coffee would change both their lives forever. The next morning, the sky over Savannah was clear, washed clean by the night's heavy rain. Sunlight filtered through the windows of Grace's small coffee shop, glinting off the chrome espresso machine. The smell of fresh muffins filled the air as she unlocked the front door and flipped the sign to "Open." Her routine had always been simple: brew, serve, smile, and hope that each day would bring enough customers to cover the bills. Business had been slow for months. Ever since her father passed away, Grace had been fighting to keep the shop alive. The building lease, the overdue power bill, the rising cost of beans, every invoice felt like another wave pulling her under. But she refused to give up. Her father had built this shop from nothing, and she could not bear to let it die. By mid-morning, a few regulars had come and gone. Grace wiped her hands on her apron and looked out the window, surprised to see a familiar figure walking across the street. It was the traveler from last night, the man with the kind eyes and the tired smile. He looked a little cleaner today, though his jacket was still patched and his boots were still worn. He stepped inside, carrying a paper bag. "Morning," he said with a soft grin. "I brought you something." Grace tilted her head. "That's new. Most of my customers come here for the food, not to bring it." He laughed. "It is just some peaches from the farmer's market. Thought you might use them for pie or something." She accepted the bag, touched by the gesture. "That is sweet of you. Thank you." He looked around at the shop. "You run this place all by yourself?" "Pretty much," Grace replied. "My mom helps when she can, but her health has not been great lately." He nodded, listening. "That must be tough." "I won." Grace shrugged. "It is, but this place keeps me going. My dad used to say a cup of coffee can save a soul. I like to believe that." The man smiled faintly, his gaze thoughtful. "Your dad was a wise man." He paused before adding, "Mind if I help around here for a bit? I am not much good at sitting still." Grace blinked. "You? Work here?" "Sure. I can wash dishes or sweep the floor. I owe you for the coffee." She laughed. "You already paid with that $10 thank you note, remember?" He smiled again, that quiet, steady smile. "Then let me earn it properly." After a moment's hesitation, Grace nodded. "Fine. But if you break anything, you are buying it." He rolled up his sleeves and went to work, humming softly as he cleaned tables and carried trays. To her surprise, he worked hard, asking questions about the shop, about her father, about the customers. He did not talk much about himself, only that his name was Ethan, and he was traveling through the South to see how people live when the world is not watching. As the hours passed, the shop filled with the warm buzz of conversation. Grace caught herself smiling more than usual. There was something peaceful about having another person moving beside her, someone who seemed to understand quiet moments. By the time the afternoon rush ended, Ethan was wiping down the counter while she counted the day's earnings. He looked at the worn ledger book beside the register and asked gently, "Are you managing to keep up with it all?" Grace hesitated, then sighed. "Barely. Some days I wonder why I keep trying. The bank keeps calling, the rent keeps climbing, but giving up would feel like losing my father all over again." Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then his voice softened. "The world needs people who do not give up. That is what makes it worth living in." Something in the way he said it made her chest tighten. She did not know why she cared what this stranger thought, but she did. When the day was done, Ethan picked up his backpack. "Thanks for letting me stay," he said. "You are kind, Grace. The world could use more of that." She smiled, though her eyes held worry she could not explain. "Where will you go tonight?" "Not sure," he said, glancing out at the fading sunlight. "Maybe the park, maybe the bus stop. I will figure it out." Grace hesitated, then reached behind the counter. She handed him a small paper bag. "There is a sandwich in here. It is not much, but it will keep you warm." He looked at her with genuine gratitude. "You do not owe me anything." "I know," she said softly, "but kindness is not a debt." He nodded once, slipping the bag into his backpack. "Then I guess I owe you another thank you note." Ethan stepped out into the evening light, the sky painted gold and pink. Grace watched him disappear around the corner, a quiet ache forming in her heart. She told herself it was just sympathy for a stranger, but something deeper whispered otherwise. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain again, and Grace had no idea that this wandering traveler, this man she had taken in out of simple kindness, was about to change every part of her life. The next few days in Savannah passed quietly. Grace opened her shop every morning as usual, and Ethan kept showing up just after sunrise, always offering to help before she could even ask. He fixed a loose shelf, replaced a flickering bulb, and taught her how to balance the coffee grinder motor. The man who once looked like a tired traveler now moved with quiet confidence, as if he had always belonged there. Still, there was something mysterious about him. He never said where he stayed at night or how long he planned to remain in town. He did not have a phone, and his clothes, though worn, were always clean. He talked about places he had been, but his stories were oddly precise, as if he had lived many lives. Grace tried not to pry. She simply appreciated his company. Customers had started to notice him too. One afternoon, a woman whispered to Grace while paying for her latte, "Your new worker is cute. Be careful, though he looks like trouble." Grace laughed it off, but she could not deny that the man's gentle smile had started to stay in her mind longer than she wanted to admit. On the 5th day, the sun broke through after another long rain. Ethan arrived with a small bouquet of wildflowers he said he picked from the side of the road. "For the counter," he said. "Every good place needs color." Grace placed the flowers in an old glass jar. "You are full of surprises, Ethan." He chuckled. "Only good ones, I hope." Oh. That evening, after the last customer left, Grace sat by the register, calculating her bills. Ethan wiped down tables quietly until he saw her shoulders slump. "Tough numbers again?" he asked. Grace nodded. "If business does not improve soon, I might lose this place. The bank already called twice this week." Ethan leaned against the counter. "What would your father have said?" She smiled faintly. "He would have told me to stay brave, to keep pouring coffee like every cup mattered." Ethan looked at her with an expression she could not read. "He sounds like a man who believed in people." "He did," Grace replied softly, "and I am trying to do the same." The moment hung between them, tender and unspoken. Then Ethan glanced toward the back wall where her father's old photograph hung. "He must be proud," he said. Grace's eyes shimmered with tears she quickly wiped away. "Pride does not pay rent, but thank you." He smiled. "Maybe something else will." "No." Before she could ask what he meant, the front door opened suddenly. The wind blew in hard, scattering napkins across the floor. Ethan moved quickly, shutting the door, then laughed when he saw her startled face. "Savannah storms," he said. "They like to keep us humble." Grace laughed too, her heart lighter. But that small sentence stayed with her. Maybe humility was part of what kept them both going. The next morning, Ethan came in carrying his old camera. "I fixed it," he said. "Thought I would take some photos of the shop, maybe help with your online page." Grace looked puzzled. "You know about online pages?" He grinned. "A little. Enough to make a story look good." They spent the afternoon snapping photos of steaming cups, wooden chairs, and sunlight spilling through lace curtains. Ethan captured the place the way her father once described it, a small corner of hope in a busy world. That night, as she closed the shop, Grace found a note near the counter. It was written in careful handwriting. "You give this town more than coffee. You give it heart. Do not stop." It was signed simply, E. Grace held the note for a long time. A strange warmth filled her chest, the kind that comes when someone truly sees you. But as she turned off the lights and stepped outside, she caught sight of Ethan across the street. He was sitting on a park bench under the lamplight, staring at something in his hands. It was not his camera this time. It was a sleek silver phone, the kind only people with serious money owned. She froze. He pressed a button, said a few quiet words, then slipped it back into his bag. When he looked up, his expression had changed, no longer the lost traveler, but someone focused, deliberate, and in control. Grace stepped back into the shadows, her heart beating faster. Who was he really? The following morning, Ethan came as usual, his smile easy, his hands steady on the coffee pot. But now, every time she looked at him, Grace felt a flicker of curiosity and unease. Something about this man did not add up. And yet, when he looked at her, she still saw kindness in his eyes, kindness she wanted to believe in. She had no idea that the truth about Ethan Cole was about to turn her world upside down, or that the very thing he was hiding would test the limits of her faith in people all over again. The summer fair arrived the following weekend, and downtown Savannah came alive with laughter, music, and the smell of roasted corn. Grace set up a small booth for her coffee shop, hoping to draw new customers. She decorated it with white string lights and hand-painted signs that read, "Kindness brewed daily." Ethan helped her carry crates of coffee beans and paper cups, joking that he was becoming her unpaid assistant. "You do not have to be here all day," Grace told him as she arranged pastries on the table. "I want to," Ethan replied easily. "Besides, someone has to make sure you eat something." The fair was lively, full of color and sound. Grace felt grateful just to be part of it. Business was steady, locals stopped by to support her, and tourists were charmed by the cozy setup. For a moment, she forgot her worries. She laughed, handed out samples, and smiled in the sunday. Late in the afternoon, a man in a suit approached her booth. His tone was sharp, his expression colder than the lemonade he held. "Grace Miller," he said. You know you are 2 weeks late on your loan payment. Her stomach tightened. Mr. Patterson, I am aware. I just need a little more time. The fare should help. He gave a sarcastic smile. Time does not pay interest, Miss Miller. You might want to start packing up that little coffee shop before the bank does it for you. Ethan, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. That was uncalled for, sir. The man turned, sizing him up. And who might you be? Her boyfriend? Grace tried to diffuse the tension. Please, Ethan. It is fine. But Ethan's calm voice carried a quiet strength. No, it is not fine. You do not talk to her like that. The man frowned, clearly offended. Watch yourself, kid. You look like you can barely afford a bus ticket, let alone an opinion. A few people nearby had started watching. Grace's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She reached out and tugged Ethan's sleeve. Let it go, she whispered. Ethan clenched his jaw but stepped back. The man gave one last glare before walking away. Grace turned to Ethan, her heart pounding. You did not have to do that. I know, he said quietly, but someone should. They finished the day in tense silence. As the sun set and the fare lights flickered on, Ethan carried the last box back to the truck. When he handed her the final crate, his voice softened. You should not have to face people like that alone. Grace sighed. I have been doing it for years. I will be fine. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. You do not always have to be fine, Grace. His words lingered in the air, heavy and tender at once. Grace looked away, unsure how to respond. Somewhere deep down, she felt that he was not speaking just as a friend or a worker, but as someone who had seen her pain and wanted to carry part of it. When they drove back through the quiet streets, the fare's lights glowed faintly behind them. Grace glanced at Ethan beside her. The wind ruffled his hair as he stared out the window, lost in thought. There was something in his silence, a weight, a secret he was still guarding. She wanted to ask him who he really was, but the words never came. That night, after Ethan left, Grace stood alone in her shop, counting the money from the fare. It was not much, but it was enough to buy her a little time. On the counter, she noticed one of the wildflowers Ethan had given her earlier in the week. She placed it in a jar and whispered softly to herself, just keep going. Outside, the rain began again, steady, rhythmic, almost like the heartbeat of the small town that never gave up. The following Monday began, like any other day, calm and ordinary. The morning light fell across the coffee shop as Grace arranged pastries in the display case. The bell above the door chimed once, twice, then stopped. She looked up and froze. Outside, a long black limousine had just pulled up in front of her small shop. Two men in suits stepped out first, followed by Ethan. But this was not the Ethan she knew. He was wearing a navy suit, polished shoes, and confidence that filled the doorway before he even walked in. His hair was neatly combed, his voice calm and steady when he spoke. Good morning, Grace. Her heart pounded. Ethan, what is going on? He gave a small, almost nervous smile. I owe you the truth. One of the suited men handed him a tablet, which he placed on the counter. The screen showed a sleek logo. The Cole Foundation. Grace's eyes widened. She remembered the name. It was a national organization that funded small businesses, charities, and education programs across the country. Ethan took a slow breath. My full name is Ethan Cole. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Cole Foundation. I came to Savannah because I wanted to see how small towns were recovering after the pandemic. I did not want people to recognize me, so I traveled quietly without a title, without money showing who I was. Grace stared at him, speechless. You mean to tell me you were never just a traveler? He shook his head. No, I was searching for people who still believed in kindness. And then I met you. Her stomach twisted with confusion and disbelief. So all this time you were testing me? No, Ethan said softly. I was learning from you. You reminded me that kindness is not a weakness. It is what gives everything else meaning. She backed away a step, her hands trembling. You lied to me, Ethan. You let me think you were struggling, that you needed help. And all this time, you had money. Power, everything. He looked down, guilt written across his face. I did not mean to hurt you. I just wanted to understand real people again, to remember what honesty felt like. You showed me that. Grace shook her head, anger mixing with the sting of betrayal. You watched me worry about rent. You watched me work day and night to keep this place alive. And you just stood there. Ethan's voice broke slightly. Because I wanted to help the right way. I did not want you to think it was pity. I wanted to know who you were before I offered anything. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the coffee machine. Grace's eyes filled with tears. You should have told me the truth from the beginning. I know, he said quietly. But if I had, you never would have treated me the same. You would have looked at my money, not my heart. Oh. Grace turned away, gripping the counter for balance. Everything around her, the coffee cups, the lights, the smell of cinnamon, felt distant and unreal. Ethan took a small envelope from his pocket and placed it beside her. I want to make this right. This is not charity. It is partnership. The Cole Foundation would like to help you expand this shop, turn it into something bigger, something that can change lives the way you changed mine. She did not touch the envelope. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I do not know if I can trust you. He nodded slowly. Then do not decide now. I will wait. Ethan left the envelope on the counter, then walked out to the limousine. Grace stood frozen as the door closed behind him. The sound of the engine faded into the distance, leaving only the smell of coffee and rain. In her apron pocket, the $10 bill he had once left still rested, there creased, old, and suddenly heavier than it had ever felt before. That night, Grace barely slept. The sound of rain against the window felt louder than usual, as if the storm outside was echoing the one inside her chest. She replayed every moment in her mind, the first cup of coffee, the laughter, the fare, the limousine, and the truth that shattered everything. When morning came, she walked into the shop as always. The envelope from Ethan still sat on the counter where he had left it. She picked it up, turned it over, and noticed her name written in careful handwriting, Grace Miller. She hesitated before opening it. Inside was not just a check, but also a letter. The handwriting was the same as the notes he used to leave her. Grace, I never wanted to lie. I only wanted to see if people still believed in kindness without knowing who I was. You proved they do. You proved it exists in you. I hope you will let me help you keep this place alive, not as charity, but as a promise that good things deserve to grow. Ethan. Grace set the letter down and stared at it. Her hands trembled. The words were simple, but her heart was still torn. Was it genuine, or just another test from a man who had the world at his fingertips? For the next few days, she said nothing to anyone. She worked, served coffee, smiled for customers, and tried to pretend that life was normal. But every time she looked at the empty corner where Ethan used to stand, her chest tightened. One afternoon, she saw his limousine again, parked discreetly across the street. Ethan stepped out alone, without the suits, without the polished confidence. He looked more like the man she had met that rainy night, only now. There was something humbler in his eyes. He walked in slowly. You read the letter? Grace nodded. I did. I meant every word, he said. I did not come here to buy your forgiveness. I came to earn it. Her voice was calm but distant. You do not understand, Ethan. You made me believe in something real. And then you made me doubt it. He took a deep breath. I understand that I hurt you. But I also know what I saw in you, someone brave enough to give, when she had nothing to spare. I want to stand beside that kind of strength. Not above it. Grace looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, You have no idea how hard it is to trust again. I know, he replied. That is why I am not asking you to trust me right now. I am asking you to let me prove that I am worth it. He handed her a folder. Inside were blueprints and photos. This is a proposal for Kind Cup, a community coffee program we want to start nationwide. Your shop would be the first location. You would run it. You would hire others who need a second chance, veterans, single parents, students. I want it to carry your name, not mine. Grace stared at the papers, speechless. You want me to run this? Yes, Ethan said, because you are the reason it exists. She felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. Every instinct told her to say no, to protect herself from more pain. But a quieter voice whispered that maybe this was what her father would have wanted for her to build something bigger than her own struggle. Grace closed the folder and said softly, I will think about it. Ethan smiled faintly. That is all I hoped for. As he turned to leave, she called after him, "Ethan?" He paused. She met his eyes. "If I say yes, this has to be about purpose, not pity." He nodded. "It always was." When the door closed behind him, Grace stood alone in the quiet shop, the folder still in her hands. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small flicker of hope, fragile, but real. The kind of hope that grows only after truth has broken everything else down. A week later, Grace was sweeping the front steps of her shop when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text read, "Check the local news." She frowned, opened the link, and froze. The headline made her heart sink. Cole Foundation accused of manipulating small businesses for publicity. The article claimed that Ethan's trip to Savannah had been a marketing stunt, that he had chosen her shop just to improve the company's public image. Grace felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Customers began whispering as they scrolled on their phones. Someone even asked, "So it was all fake?" She could not answer. That evening, she sat alone inside the shop, staring at the folder Ethan had given her. Every page now felt heavy with doubt. Had he really meant everything he said? Or was she just another name in a campaign? The bell above the door chimed. Ethan stepped in quietly, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Grace, I can explain." She looked up, her voice trembling. "Tell me it is not true." "It is not," he said firmly. "Someone inside the foundation leaked false reports to ruin our new program. They wanted me out because I refused to cancel it. But I promise you, none of it was fake." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Do you know what this looks like for me? People think I was part of your plan." "I know," he said, stepping closer. "And I will fix it. I will go public. I will clear your name. Even if it costs me everything." She shook her head. "You cannot fight the whole world, Ethan." He looked at her with steady determination. "Then I will fight enough of it to make this right." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance again, echoing the same storm that had brought them together weeks ago. Grace wanted to believe him, but the pain was deep. Ethan reached into his pocket and placed the old $10 bill on the counter between them. "You gave this to me when you thought I was nobody," he said softly. "Let me prove that it still means something." Grace looked at the bill, then at him. The silence that followed was heavy, with everything left unspoken. 2 days later, the storm that had rumbled across the coast finally broke into a gray morning drizzle. Grace's shop was quiet, but the noise outside was deafening. Reporters, cameras, and bystanders crowded the street. The article about Ethan's so-called publicity stunt had gone viral, and people were demanding answers. Grace had spent the night pacing the floor, torn between anger and fear. Every time she thought of Ethan, she wanted to believe him, but doubt still clung to her heart. When she heard the crowd outside growing louder, she stepped to the window. Then she froze. Ethan was standing on the steps of the courthouse across the street. Microphones pointed at his face, cameras flashing in every direction. He looked calm, but his voice carried a weight that silenced even the wind. "Everything you have heard about Grace Miller is false," he said clearly. "She did not know who I was. She did not ask for money, or fame, or help. The only thing she offered me was kindness. I went undercover to understand what real compassion looks like in this country. I found it in her." Reporters shouted questions, but Ethan continued. "The accusations against the Cole Foundation are being investigated, and the individuals responsible for this leak will be held accountable. But let me make one thing clear. Grace Miller is not a part of any campaign. She is the reason this foundation still believes in good people." "Oh," Grace's hand flew to her mouth. She felt her knees weaken. For the first time in weeks, she saw the Ethan she had met on that rainy night, the man who spoke softly but stood firm when it mattered. Within hours, the story began to shift. News outlets replayed his statement. Online comments turned from mockery to admiration, and messages of support started flooding Grace's social media. By the afternoon, the storm had cleared, leaving the sky bright and blue. Ethan returned to her shop near sunset. The crowd had thinned, the streets were calm again. When he walked in, Grace was behind the counter, wiping the same cup she had been holding all morning. "You did not have to do that," she said quietly. "I did," he replied. You did not deserve to carry blame for something you never asked for. Grace's eyes glistened. You risked your reputation for me. He shook his head. No, I told the truth. The rest will take care of itself. How? She studied him for a moment, then said, They will still come after you. Let them, Ethan said with a faint smile. I am not ashamed of who I stood up for. Grace felt something shift inside her, an old wall cracking open. So, what happens now? He reached into his pocket and placed a folded paper on the counter. The Cole Foundation Board has approved the Kind Cup project. They want you to lead it, just as we planned. You will not be working for me, Grace. You will be working with me. She hesitated, the ache of mistrust still faint in her chest. Why me? Because you do not give up, he said simply. And because the world needs more of that. For the first time since everything began, Grace smiled a quiet, tired smile, but real. I do not know if I am ready, she whispered. Ethan met her eyes. You are. You always were. She looked at the paper, then at him. The sun spilled through the window, lighting the space between them. Grace finally nodded. All right, let us build it. Outside, the last puddles of the storm reflected the golden light of the evening. Inside, for the first time in a long while, hope felt like something solid, something she could hold. 1 year later, the streets of Savannah were alive with laughter, music, and the smell of roasted coffee beans. A new sign hung above the familiar doorway, Kind Cup Coffee Foundation, brewed with heart. The small shop that once struggled to survive had become a warm community hub, filled with people who believed in second chances. Inside, Grace moved through the crowd with calm pride. The opening celebration for the foundation's first anniversary had drawn neighbors, students, veterans, and even local officials. Every corner of the shop glowed with new life-painted walls, fresh flowers, and framed photographs of smiling faces. One of those photos showed Ethan and Grace standing in front of the old shop, the words, "Kindness begins small," painted behind them. Ethan stood near the counter, speaking with a group of volunteers. He still wore his sharp suits, but there was something softer about him now, something grounded. When he caught sight of Grace across the room, his eyes warmed with quiet admiration. She walked over and handed him a cup of coffee. Still taking it black? He smiled. Always. Some habits are worth keeping. They stood side by side, watching people laugh and talk, the hum of conversation blending with the gentle strum of a guitar from the corner. Grace took a deep breath. Can you believe this? A year ago, this place was falling apart. Ethan looked around and said softly, A year ago, so was I. Grace glanced at him, her eyes soft. You rebuilt more than just a foundation, Ethan. Joe. He paused, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wooden frame. Inside, it was the same crumpled $10 bill she had once refused to take. Beneath it, he had added a single line of text. For kindness, not coffee. He held it out to her. I kept it. It reminded me who I wanted to be. Grace's eyes shimmered with emotion. You never had to prove anything to me. Maybe not, Ethan said, but I wanted to. He set the frame on the counter, then turned back to her. Grace, this foundation, this shop, everything we built, it started with your kindness. You changed my life in ways I never expected, and I do not want to spend another day without being honest about that. Her breath caught as he reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple silver ring. The room around them grew quiet as he said, This is not about money or business or the foundation. This is about us. Grace Miller, will you marry me? Tears welled in her eyes as she covered her mouth with her hand. The memories of every storm, every doubt, every quiet moment between them rushed back all at once. She nodded, her voice trembling. Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times yes. The crowd erupted in applause. Outside, the evening sky turned golden, the sun dipping behind the rooftops of Savannah. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and Grace leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. In the window reflection, the words on the new sign glowed softly. Kind Cup Coffee Foundation, where kindness brews forever. And as the lights of the city flickered on, the two of them stood together, surrounded by the laughter of people whose lives had been touched by a single act of kindness that started with a cup of coffee and a heart willing to give.